Okay, everything
Okay.
is set.
Okay.
So, shall we start?
Let's start.
咁 hello 大家好啦，咁呢一期就係 Ink 3嘅，咁但係今次啦，我又唔想寫任何 article 啊，咁雖然我之前喺 IG 就話我可能會寫 Sigmund Bauman，最近就諗緊要寫 Goffman 啦，但係我最終決定就都係唔想寫啦，因為我今日咧就打算去邀請一個都好犀利嘅人去進行一個採訪嘅。咁佢就係 Professor Ziad Elmarsafy. Did I pronounce it correctly? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes.
so Ziad is a professor who teaches comparative literature in King's College London. He had also been teaching in different schools before, like the NYU and Wellesley College. He had also written a few books in different areas, such as, so let me give you all the list, such as the literature and cultural studies, culture of early modern France, the Enlightenment, and modern Arabic literature, also containing the cultural studies about Islam. So, Ziad, I think our audience,
Right.
they are very interested about you right now. So, would you please talk a bit further about yourself?
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much indeed for welcoming me and for having me on your show. If it is a show, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure where to begin. Would you like biographical information? Would you like more intellectual information? What would you and your audience be most interested in?
Why not both? Because some are certainly happy to hear about, your life and so on, but some, they focus on mainly the brain stuff.
Right. Okay. So in a nutshell, I was born in Egypt, in Cairo, in 1967. My parents moved to Kuwait in the Gulf. There was a sort of mass importation of labor in the Gulf countries that is ongoing to this day because they were developing very, very quickly and there wasn't enough labor capacity to do all the work that needed to be done. You might have heard some of the more negative effects of that process recently in relation to the World Cup and the treatment of migrant workers in Qatar, which I think is a very serious problem that deserves global attention. But I can happily say that my life was nothing like that. I had what can only be described as a ridiculously happy childhood in Kuwait. Good friends, great family, great schools. Life was good. I went to the States to go to university. I never really expected to end up in the humanities. I started as an engineer. I started in electrical engineering. And I have to say, I discovered very quickly that I wasn't quite as clever or as talented as I thought I was. So, and part of the problem was that I was really much more interested in theory. And back in the 80s, the way engineering was taught was distinctly untheoretical. So I switched briefly to physics. I completed a degree in physics, but I knew that I wouldn't make a career out of physics. And in the American system at the time, I was lucky enough to be taught by a number of really wonderful professors in literature. And so they helped me to get into a PhD program in literature. I wrote a thesis on early modern France on the 17th and 18th centuries. And then I taught, as you say, in some American universities. It didn't work out. It all came crashing down about 20 years ago. And so I moved to the UK, and things have been much better since then. And so initially I taught at the University of York, and now I teach at King's College London. And it's great. So that's in a nutshell. In terms of the work I do as an academic, as you said very kindly in your introduction, I began by writing, as do most academics, I began by writing works about the field that I studied, that I specialized in, which is to say 17th and 18th century France. And I have to say it was very useful because it helps you understand a lot about contemporary France. The link between the 17th century and the present day is much stronger, much tighter than it is, say, in the case of England, or I imagine, in China, although I'm not really an expert on Chinese history. So if you really, one of the things that you and I are doing together is reading. We participate in a Lacan reading group. And one of the most striking things about Lacan, especially in his writings in the 50s, is the frequency with which he alludes to or refers to plays that were written in the 17th century. It's really quite striking. And then my central concern really was the question of selfhood. What does it mean to be a self? And I've always addressed it in a very non-psychoanalytic way. So initially, I worked on the individual self, and then the collective self, and then in my third book, I tried to think about what it meant when two collective selves interact with each other. And I did this through a study of the way in which the Quran was read and translated in 18th century Europe. And then I moved on to something slightly related but slightly different, which is to say how contemporary Arabic writing deals with the question of mysticism. Because in the last 30, 40 years of the 20th century, there was a bit of a boom in Arabic novelists and poets using medieval mystical language in their works. And so I thought, well, if of all the things you could do as a writer, why would you do that? And then my last book, which came out a couple of years ago, dealt with the intersection or the overlap between certain ideas, certain branches of Islam, mystical branches of Islam, and contemporary French philosophy. I worked on three figures who are really quite fascinating, and all of whom relate to Lacan, ironically, in various ways. Massignon, who was probably the most important student of Islam in the 20th century, and then his student, Corbin. And one thing we can say is that Lacan explicitly cites Corbin's work in Seminar 7. And then finally, Corbin's student, Jambet, who spent a great deal of time studying Lacan and studying philosophy, but who managed to get beyond it in ways that are really quite fascinating. So I won't say if you want to read more, read my book, if you want to find out more, but I will say that you can learn a lot by reading Jambet's works. He's a really fascinating and truly wonderful man. And that brings us to today, where I'm trying to sort out my ideas about Lacan again, this time in relation to a project that deals with racism and with the problem that I spoke about earlier, which is to say the treatment of migrant workers in the Gulf and the racisms that multiply in that context. It's still in its early stages. I'm hoping to get a book out in a couple of years, and so I'll be able to tell you more about that if we talk again.
I wish you the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and I could already, kind of like know it because you've studied in a lot of different fields. Just, during the meeting, like 30 minutes ago, you said that, it's clear that you've studied sociology before. You said Bourdieu, and not study, but, at least know.
Yeah, I know a lot of sociology, yes.
Yes, Bourdieu is really tough person to read.
Right.
And yeah. So let's get to the main points today, which I think most audiences are gonna be most interested is that what the heck is comparative literature? Because we've heard literature in many ways. In Hong Kong, secondary students could study Chinese literature or the good old English literature. However, we've actually haven't got into a word or term named comparative literature. So what is it, Ziad?
Okay, I'd be happy to answer that question. And because you mentioned Hong Kong, I'll give you a personal answer and a professional answer. The personal answer is that there is a great specialist of comparative literature who I believe is now in Hong Kong. He and I overlapped very briefly in my career long ago in California. His name is Long Zhang, and I believe he teaches at the City University of Hong Kong, I think, but I'm not absolutely positive. But I think he's somewhere in Hong Kong. He wrote a great book called The Tao and the Logos, and it's a great comparison of how East Asian and Western conceptions of reason and literature interact and in a way play with each other. It's a great book and I highly recommend it. And if you get a chance, I highly recommend listening to his lectures and even meeting him if you can. But to answer the more academic question, what is comparative literature? The good news is it's a question everybody in the field is still struggling with. So if you don't think you understand it, you're not alone. The idea basically is that we can take literature outside the vertical silo of nation and language and think about it across nations and languages. The person who is most strongly associated with this is also the greatest writer in the German language, namely Goethe. So Goethe basically coined a term in an exchange with his best friend Eckermann about 200 years ago, and the term is world literature. And he says, I'm convinced that literature is no longer the possession or the preserve of any one single nation or any one single culture. It belongs to all of humanity. And because literature belongs to all of humanity, we have to think about it in those terms. So no longer, the idea is that English literature isn't just English literature. But more to the point, Chinese literature isn't just Chinese. It is, in fact, something that belongs to everyone. And so we have to think about literature not only in terms of the political and literary and linguistic histories of any one country or any one language, but across countries and across languages. Now, one aspect of this that is ironic is that literature has always been this way. So if we think, for instance, of the history of Latin literature, which for many years was the basic thing that everybody in Europe studied, the earliest Latin text that we have is a translation from a Greek poem into Latin. So literature is always already crossing that boundary and is always already being translated for an audience that speaks a different language. And so the idea that literature is somehow organically or essentially linked to people who speak a given language has to be called into question. It doesn't mean that that link doesn't exist, but it does mean that those people and those languages are in the world. And in the world, there are multitudes of people and languages. And that is the only reasonable way of thinking about literature. One of the people who helped me think about literature most frequently, and a thinker to whom I regularly return, is a man named Edward Said. Now, Edward Said is most frequently read because of his book Orientalism, which has been a very influential book in a number of fields. I have to say, though, that this is a mistake. I'm a big fan of Edward Said, but I have serious problems with his book Orientalism, like a lot of people do. But a much better book to read is the book that he published shortly after Orientalism, which is called The World, the Text, and the Critic. And it is this triangle of the world, the text, and the critic, or the reader, that best defines the shape within which comparative literature can be inscribed, as it were. And another term that I find very useful from Edward Said is maybe not world literature, as Goethe put it, but the worldliness of literature. We always have to think about literature as it operates in the world, in relation to history, in relation to power structures, in relation to audiences, in relation to, yes, the sociology of education and the sociology of literature, and so on and so forth. So if the term world literature bothers you, if the term comparative literature bothers you, you could think about them as the result of the equation, the world plus the text plus the reader equals comparative literature.
It also reminds me, because you said before, they're not only, for example, Chinese literature, not only Chinese, yes, they're connected in some way. It reminds me of the anthropologist Lévi-Strauss. We just talked about it.
Yes.
Lévi-Strauss has a strong stand in this. Every culture, there must be some links between them. Even they seem like completely different, but in the end, behind the bars, under the depths of these cultures, they have links.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, thinking of the world as through these relationships, through these links, is a more honest way of thinking about what makes us human than thinking of the world in terms of nations. And I'm not saying nations and states don't matter. In fact, they're very important, but they're not everything. They're just a political device that we have invented and agreed upon as a way of solving some problems. But it doesn't mean that transnational or transcultural or trans-state links don't exist.
Sort of like the early 20th century, when the French historians, I forgot what that group of person are called, but they describe it. If you want to write history, you don't just write about the wars and economical events, but also other like cultural events.
Yes.
I remember one of them is called Mark Bloch.
Yes, very good. Yeah. Very impressive. Yes. I think you're probably thinking of the school of the annals. And
yes.
And really the annal historians have completely reinvented that term because it's taken from classical history, right? So, the annals of Rome or the annals of Greece and so on. But really they've changed it into something much more exciting and much more dynamic. And what's really interesting is the debate is still going on. So there are sort of endless quarrels among historians about what counts as history, what should be read as history, whether it's the big events or the small events or something in between. It's something we don't talk about enough. So it's very exciting to see young people taking an interest in Marc Bloch and the Annales. That's really great.
So let's just stay tuned. Maybe one
yes,
day
absolutely.
Yes. So having studied in so many different fields in humanities, especially in humanities, what feel on teenagers nowadays, especially living in this dynamical 21st century where, ideology, with so many problems now. I mean, there are a lot of problems in the past too, but, new problems, new dangers, they strike, and we don't know how to defend them. So under all these fog, you can say, how do you view teenagers?
I think teenagers are the most interesting people in the world. And if I regret anything, I don't often regret my age. I've had a great life. I still have a good life. There's really nothing to complain about. But one thing I miss is the ability to connect with young people. It's something I experience with my students. I see them every week. I talk to them every week, but I just don't know what they're going through internally. I know what they're going through externally, of course, because they tell me, but I don't know what they're thinking. It's also something I think about with respect to my nephews and my niece, who are all growing up very quickly. And I think they're fascinating people, but there's a limit to how much we can talk about. And, I just don't know enough about Minecraft to talk to my nephew about, his interest in Minecraft. I'll say a couple of things, both gross generalizations, but I think they might be useful just to help us think about this. I don't think there's any teenager alive today who has lived through an extended period of time that was not also a period of global crisis. So there have been a lot of local crises, and there always will be. If I just think of my life, 1967 was a very traumatic year in the Arab world, the year of my birth. Growing up in Kuwait, there was always something nearby, a crisis, a war getting ready to erupt. The revolution in Iran in 1979, there was a really terrifying bombing campaign in Kuwait City in the 80s. And there was always the sense that, the world was about to end. But the weird thing is, and this is one of the marvels of the human brain, the weird thing is everybody got used to it. We always find a way to reinstate the symbolic order no matter what. Now, some writers, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Doctorow or Singer, there was a writer who said that the greatest curse of the human soul is its ability to get used to anything. I don't think that's true. I think that's the great blessing of being human, that actually you can always find a way to integrate everything you go through into the symbolic order. You can always find a way to talk about it. You can always find a way to resolve it. And you can always find a way to invent new solutions. So it's really not, it's not the end of the world. In fact, nothing is the end of the world except the end of the world. So on one hand, it is, as you say, a crisis-ridden age. We talk a great deal about the environmental crisis, and I think it is a very real thing. but we don't talk about it enough, and we're not doing enough to keep it at bay. But there are a lot of also local political crises. There's a great deal of violence that is erupting on a world scale nowadays. And we don't really think enough about what the reasons behind it are. We have a tendency to overstate and overthink the case in terms of political interests and economic interests, but we don't say enough about what makes people want to do these things. And one of the places where we can learn more about what makes people want to do these things is, of course, psychoanalysis. In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud tells us that no matter how hard we try, we will never get rid of the aggression that characterizes being human. But what we can do is find solutions for that aggression. We can find ways of being aggressive that don't involve destroying the planet or destroying each other. That particular approach seems to be fading from view very quickly, and I find it very troubling. So I'm hoping that today's teenagers will read more Freud and think more creatively about how to deal with aggression as not just their own, but everybody else's. We've gone through a period of 30 years where a cult of market economics has really dominated everything that all of humanity does. And one of the unfortunate ways in which that's unfolded is in the endless praise of aggression. That, being an aggressive trader means that you'll generate wealth and build more jobs. Think of someone like Elon Musk. I mean, he's probably the figure whom we imagine as being the most aggressive and therefore the most successful businessman in the world. But I don't think this is really either a very intelligent or a very helpful way of thinking about anything, be it economics or politics. People have traded with each other for millennia, but they haven't done it in this crazy way. People have lived with each other for millennia, but they haven't done it in this crazy way. And we are on the verge, I fear, of losing the benefits of one of the longest periods of peace that humanity has ever known, which is to say after World War II. I'm not saying there were no wars after World War II. I'm just saying that comparatively, the level of violence did decrease. And now it's building up again. And I think we have to be very, very careful. So I hope that today's teenagers will think very hard about what they want and need from each other and from other people. And I'm sure, I have faith that they will come up with great ways of dealing with that, because the future is theirs. And I think it's going to be a great future. I also want to say that this crisis-ridden world isn't just the way things are. It doesn't have to be this way. There are ways of dealing with it. There are ways of changing it. But it's up to you to formulate the will and the plan to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. And did give me some advice and new thinking paths. And I think that our audiences will definitely be benefited from your answer. Just given.
I'll say one more thing. One way of thinking about what we want and need from each other, one very helpful way, is literature. So literature isn't just stories, although stories are important. Literature isn't just poetry, although poetry is important. Literature isn't just drama, although drama is important. But it's really a way of inscribing desire in language. And so even if you find a book boring, it can still be helpful to help you think about what people want and need from each other at various times, in various places, in various languages, and how that might translate into or differ from what you yourself are going through.
I totally agree. It reflects the spirits of the times. It really does.
Yeah, it really does. Yes. In fact, I was just talking to my students about this a couple of weeks ago. So the Egyptian novelist Naguib Mahfouz, who's probably the best way of learning about Egypt, wrote a series of novels during the interwar period and just after the war. And to this day, it would be no exaggeration to say that they are the best social history of Cairo, of urban life in Egypt, that you can find anywhere. Now, part of this, of course, reflects the development of the field of the academic study of history, where a lot of the ideas of the Annal school didn't reach the historians of Egypt until much later. So one day we will have definitive social histories of Egypt in the interwar period. But until then, Naguib Mahfouz is not a bad idea in the sense that you may not learn exactly where everything was and who did what on any given day, but it will give you an idea of how people thought and spoke and reflected on their lives during that period. And in that respect, it remains an invaluable document.
Yeah. So you've talked about, you've talked a lot about literature, how it reflects the world and the spirits of people. However, we are now in the 21st century, the internet, the technology stuff, they just, rise us up, this is booming, everything so fast. You just told me we are living in an age of Twitter and hacking.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence is one of the biggest, the most on heat discussions we're having now. This is the on heat topic. And recently, not long ago, not really recently, but a few months ago, I've read two stories on Instagram and app, sort of like Twitter. On Instagram, one was written by a local Hong Kong author, you may say. The other one is written by an AI. So the novelist gave some terms, gave the plots to the AI. The AI wrote and wrote and wrote, and himself also wrote one. And he put both stories, posted both stories, and let us, the readers, guess which one was written by himself and which one was written by the AI. And guess what, Ziad? I guessed it wrong.
Well, why did you guess it wrong?
Because they were so alike, and the AI, the way he writes, the plots, all those vocabulary he uses, just fits the novels I read in the past or occasionally. So, Ziad, do you think that AI writing machines are going to replace us human authors one day, or maybe even creating some masterpieces that we've never imagined of?
Definitely the latter. There will be masterpieces that we can't imagine. And in fact, we already have. I mean, it is true that the advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence of the last, say, 5 or 6 years are just mind-blowing. I mean, it's happened very quickly, almost very suddenly, and it's completely changed the landscape of how we think about how machines think. This is, of course, a debate that's been going on for years, ever since computers took on their more widespread, more distributed, and more manageable form in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s. Because before then, really, computers were just these big things that filled a room and worked very slowly, and were very cumbersome and so on. So, to a certain extent, the debate we're having now about ChatGPT and AI and so on is just another chapter in that bigger debate about will the machines replace us. The short and not very satisfying answer is machines will replace whatever we allow them to replace. So it's really a question of what we decide, what we value, what we think is important, and what we don't think is important. A second historical answer is that 90% of the time, the machines simply replace tasks that are boring, repetitive, and mind-numbing. So if you think of robots on an assembly line in a factory, if you think of, I don't know how things are in Hong Kong, but the idea of arithmetic has completely been written out of the school curriculum now because it's just not a skill that anybody needs. It's not a skill that's valued. What is valued is the ability to use an iPad, say, to solve more complex problems. So in that respect, I think that trend will definitely continue. And a big part of machine learning is just boring and repetitive stuff. You just have the machine read, billions and billions of texts, and then they learn how to reproduce that pattern. A third answer, psychoanalytic, and it's one that Lacan gave in one of his seminars, in Seminar 20. The question was, as you know, he was always very interested in cybernetics. So, basically, how do thinking machines differ from thinking beings that we are? And the answer he always gave was, if the machine has no unconscious, then it won't replace us. It may do things faster, stronger, better than we can. but we can't really speak of a replacement per se. And one line that he gives in the seminar is really very intriguing. He says, we all know that machines can think, but do they know? How do we know? We don't know what the machines know. And in fact, as far as we can make out, they don't know what they know in the way that we know what we know. Machines don't have an unconscious. Machines just aren't wired the way we are. So it's really very difficult to know. My guess is that the answer will depend on not on the machines themselves and not even on the available technology. It never does depend on the available technology. We have technologies that can do all sorts of things, but we always make decisions based on political and economic viability. How much will it cost to make something? How much will it cost to keep something running forever? And so on and so forth. So that will probably be the decisive factor. That said, I have to say, it's a very exciting time to be alive. I really think it's amazing that we have machines that can do this stuff. And I look forward to seeing what else they can do. It's really quite amazing. And I really have the highest respect for the people who can think of this stuff and who can make it happen and who can, basically develop it and take it to the next stage. Not only with respect to AI, but just about everything else. I mean, whether it's the development of the mRNA vaccine in record time, or the James Webb telescope that was launched this year and is now completely changing our view of the history of the universe. This is incredible stuff. It really is. So I hope more teenagers go into astrophysics or AI or whatever. And I hope that they don't stop reading literature, whether it's written by machines or by people, because I think literature helps you. It helps you not be overwhelmed by all this stuff. It's very easy to. We know that one of the most frequent human responses to mathematical advances or scientific discoveries is amazement followed by a sort of horrified recoil. And the life of Pascal, I think, is a great testament to that. He was a mathematical genius who found his own genius unbearable, as it were. But it's still amazing. There's just nothing like it in the universe. It's just incredible. Or maybe there is, but the fact that we get to live through this is really very exciting.
So again, we shall just stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah, stay tuned and don't stop reading.
In literature.
Yeah, literature and other stuff as well.
So, in the end, literature has its own purpose, even in the age, maybe in the future, and AI taking over us humans, is that it still reflects, and it keeps us away from all those crazy stuff, happening. Advances are really fast nowadays, especially modernization, as we saw in the history books. But history really does give us a telescope, a microscope, looking into these events and tutoring us whether which path we shall go. Yeah. And so again, I think this is it today for us, Ziad. Wow, it was a really dense and great conversation that we just had in these 40 minutes. Time flies, really. It felt like a decade in the Lacan reading section.
It was very momentous. Yes.
I thought like yesterday I asked you. I thought like we could just after this section, okay, I'm okay, just blitz it. No.
You need to take. You have to let your brain take it all in and process everything and so on.
Yeah. Next time I'll keep it in my mind.
Yes. I think it's time for a nap.
Yes, it's time for a nap. After dinner, I'm definitely sleeping good tonight.
Good.
So you have to eat lunch or go to work at like 12?
I have to do both, actually. Eat lunch and go to work. And I also want to take a nap, but there's just no time. So.
Oh, no. Maybe the AI will help us to take the nap in the future.
I think so. Yes. Can AI take a nap for you? That's a great idea, actually. Yes.
Take a nap for your conscience.
Yes. Yeah.
So Ziad, I guess that's today, and thank you for your time. You know, you are
Thank
busy
you.
man, as I know, as I read. And thank you. And
Thank you.
we'll see each other next week.
Yeah, I'll see you next week.
And thank you. So
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks to the audience.
and thanks to the audience. Yeah.
Yes.
Goodbye, Ziad.
Bye-bye.
Nice.
Ciao. Bye-bye. Thank you.